A few blocks from my home, there's a local public library. I visit it on a regular basis, not necessarily because I'm interested in the books, you see, but because they house several computer terminals that can be used to either search their local database for titles, or they can be used to go online. I've been unemployed for several months, and have unfortunately been unable to afford even the most frugal of internet packages. For now, I kind of use my neighbors, but besides that, this terminal, has been my sole technological resource, at least since I started hunting for work. Everything else has always involved person and paper. Anyway, when I started using this terminal a few weeks ago, I convinced myself that I was close to, a breakthrough, that I'd hear back from someone in a relatively short amount of time. I could see the light at the end of the tunnel, as it were. The first day I was there, the librarian directed me to a randomly available station. The computers were organized with letters and numbers coupled together with dashes. My personal one was R-1032. Of course, Google is my primary search engine, as I'm sure is also the case for most other people. And I grew up using the keyboard and have always been somewhat of a speedy typist, although not always the most accurate. So the first string of text that I entered into the search bar was kinda garbled in certain spots. But I pressed enter anyway, figuring that I'd be able to choose my intended question from the suggestion that would follow on the next page. There's sometimes a source of humor, when they're outlandishly incorrect or suggest that you search for something you had no intention on looking for. I had submitted job search websites as my search request, and it had responded with something that was, to be honest, more alarming than funny. It said, "Did you mean I need help?" Although I really did need help, and it'd be plausible for me to search it, the suggestion wasn't even close to my original inquiry. So I used the cursor to highlight the text that I had input into the search bar, and went to press backspace. But when I did, the search page remained, but a command console appeared over it, covering, a fifth of the screen. Its front seemed primitive and aged, but bright over its black background. At the bottom of the window, a white square blinked every few moments. It was a field that I could type text into. Apparently, it was intended for responses, or I guess other commands. In this case, a reply. The computer seemed to want information. It said, "Hello. Is this user guest 12? I tried clicking outside the console to get back to the web browser. Anytime I did, the bar along the top edge of the console window would flash for a few moments, and then shortly after, the white square would resume its slow blinking. I was locked in. Unsure of what was going on, I typed yes. And I guess a quick attempt to dismiss it, but it didn't go away. Instead, it generated another line of text almost immediately. Annoyed, I glanced to see what it was so that I could get rid of it, and get on with filing out as many applications as I could. But it was another question, honestly more vague and bizarre than it was procedural. It said, "Can you help me?" I considered calling over one of the administrators and moving to another terminal. Honestly, I didn't have time for this, and I was starting to become a little more unnerved than I was upset. At the same time, I was highly intrigued. I furrowed my brow as I wondered what this could even be about, but even if it was strange or threatening, I could always report it to the staff or even just unplug it. So I typed "how" into the response field. It took me a few moments before I actually pressed enter. But on cue, the terminal processed the question and generated the needed explanation. "I need you to bring me these." Underneath the sentence, a small list had appeared. It contained the titles of about a dozen different books, along with the appropriate labels that I could use to find them. They seemed to cover a range of different subjects, including biology, physics, medicine, as well as animation and design. None seemed like they would be hard to find, but I was still puzzled, so I asked the obvious question. "Why?" "Scan them in. You will be compensated. Please enter the email address associated with your PayPal account." I had to read it several times. I'd never had an exchange with any computer, or anything artificial that was anything more than obviously automated. This seemed like something completely different, and I was, admittedly, very fascinated. My PayPal account was at absolute zero, and there hadn't been any money in it in years. I bit my lip considering the possibilities. I typed in my address and pressed enter. The computer responded almost instantaneously, once again. Check the balance. I was no longer locked into the command console's window. I moved the cursor around in circles for a few seconds to verify my freedom, and then I went into my PayPal's homepage and logged into my account. And it wasn't much longer until I was looking at my balance statement. It stood at $5,000. I shifted in my chair a little bit to redistribute my weight. I was really starting to get nervous at this point. The transaction had been sent from an address that looked like gibberish. The terminal didn't wait for my response this time, and instead displayed another statement. There will be another deposit if you bring them to me. It can also be taken away. Will you bring them to me? Honestly, in my current financial state, it probably wouldn't even have taken that much to convince me. I walked away from the terminal and up to the front desk. The receptionist looked at me over her glasses. I asked for her pen and a piece of scratch paper, which she was delighted to obtain for me. I took them back to the terminal and transferred the list of books from pixels to ink. I arranged them in alphabetical order and then spent the next hour or so prowling around the shelves, fingering through the space between all of the spines. I really didn't have any idea who I might be doing this for. Whoever they were, they had access to large amounts of money. Probably not legally. But the guilt didn't linger too long. Once I imagined eating a nice meal that night. I got the first 6 and then brought them back to the terminal before fetching the second 6. Once I'd gathered them all, I sat down in front of the computer. R-1032. But there was no console window on the screen. I wasn't sure how to access it manually, but I didn't have to struggle for too long. Once I moved the mouse, I was locked into another dialogue with the command console, in which the computer addressed me again. Place them under the desk. I thought for a moment, but didn't take time to ask why it wanted me to. I tucked them tightly into the corner against the edge. Afterwards, I typed, "OK," into the text field. I panicked for a few seconds as the computer seemed to hang up, thinking that it might have frozen. Then, lines of text began to appear and make their way across and down the black background. It had generated a short paragraph. "We are unable to complete the scan at this time. Please return to this station later tonight. The door will be unlocked for you. We will be able to proceed with the scan at that time." I don't think that I fully understood what it was asking me to do. The shadiness of the request definitely had me questioning legality once again. I wasn't sure if it was asking me to break in, so to speak. I suppose not, since the door would be unlocked, but how would it be unlocked? Was one of the staff going to leave it open? And what did that mean? I considered just leaving the library, take the money and run, as they say, but I think that's what I would have done if the terminal hadn't implied that it could remove the funds just as easily as put them in. So I typed OK once again, and the console window shut down. I stared at the desktop for a while. Then a few seconds later a window popped up that said logging off, and finally it settled on the login screen and began to idle there. I left the library and thanked the receptionist for pen and paper on the way out. When I came back to the library that night, I spent a lot of time looking around before I even tried the door. It was crisp out, and I had to put on a jacket for the walk. The exterior of the library looked largely the same, except that there weren't any vehicles in the small parking lot. I didn't see or hear anyone around. I stood and checked my surroundings a bit before finally deciding to pull open the door. It didn't resist, and I made my way in. It was fairly dark, besides a few areas that were lit by whatever light emitted from the electronic devices. From the front door, I could see where my terminal was, against the far wall. Apparently, it was on because I could see a ray of light being projected from the monitor onto the bookshelf across from it. Nevertheless, I could still see well enough to navigate the library's interior. I made my way over to R-1032. I pulled the chair out a few inches from the desk and crouched to grab the books that I'd left in the corner. And thankfully they were all there. I would have hated to hunt for any of them again, especially in the dark, Jesus. I sat down with the thick stack of books before placing them to the right of the monitor so that they could be referenced at a moment's notice. Then I moved the mouse to see if it would wake the terminal, and of course it did. Then the command console window appeared. Use the nearest scanner. Scan the first page of each book. The rest will be found. It took me all of half an hour to get the pages scanned in. Once I had, the terminal prompted me again. It showed that Robert Hogue Rawlings Library has a 3-dimensional printer on the network. Please press Enter to begin 3-dimensional printing. It had been absolutely silent until the machine in the staff room began whirling and roaring. It was so loud that it startled me. I glanced back at the command console window again, but there weren't any additional messages. I could see a light through the office glass behind me. The sound became more unpredictable and frankly terrifying. It sounded as if it were working up to an explosion or a malfunction. I guess some excessive increase in power that would fucking shake the area. I got up from the terminal and practically sprinted over to that printer. It sounded like it was choking. Once I entered the room, though, it went quiet. The last sound that it made was a low whine, signifying the end of its cycle. I looked around again before opening the front cover, which almost smelled like it was smoking. I squinted as I tried to make out the shape in the darkness. Whatever it was very small. Its texture and its color looked like tan rubber. The smell was a little stronger now. I reached in and held it in my hand. I was startled by the sensation of what felt like loose flesh. It scared me so much that I dropped it onto the floor with a quick retraction. I heard it splat, and nausea started to set in. The smell was wanting to make me gag. I felt for a light switch in the dark and found one. I tried to calm down and catch my breath as I leaned against the edge of a nearby doorway, and then my eyes caught sight of what had splattered on the floor. It looked like some kind of a fetus. It was slightly larger than any I'd seen, but still very, very much resembled one. Its head had cracked when I dropped it. The eyeball seemed to hang from the socket. Its undeveloped mouth was shaped into an O. I was paralyzed for a little while. I knew that I couldn't leave it there. I picked up what I could and cupped its body in the palm of my hands. I knew that there was a dumpster out back, so I jogged outside and over to it. As the mushy texture of whatever it was sank into my skin, it felt like I was tainted. I couldn't look at it as I threw it in, or while I brushed my hands off afterwards. I went back inside and closed the front cover of the printer, and then I went back to the terminal so that I could put the books back on the shelves. I didn't want anyone to know that anyone had been here, or that those books had been gathered up for anything. Just looking at the light of the monitor made my heart sink. I felt filthy and low. I didn't see the console window, so I moved the mouse, but nothing happened. I ran the web browser and went to the PayPal homepage. My balance sat at 10,000. Is it sick that that excited me? Even if only a little? I don't know if it's wrong to admit that. I shut down the web browser with the intent to leave the library immediately. I closed the window and logged out. As I watched the terminal shut down, the screen went black for a few moments, but then I could see that it was logging back in again. It booted up, and once again I was at the desktop. I moved the mouse this time, and the console window appeared. Hello. Is this user guest 13?